Welcome GRD 132, Typography 1, to our ex11 exercise on readability. We're going to work in Word again, and we're going to do a little layout, almost like a flyer type layout, something that would be more like an article you'd see on the web, but we're going to do it for print first, and we're going to focus on readability. Now, in our last exercise in Word, we focused on formatting techniques. We're going to use those to make this document look good. And I have a sample and I have a beginning file to work with that has a lot of issues with it. So where you could find that to open it up in Word, either on Mac or Windows, is go here to Unit 8 and it's ex11. So I'm going to click on here and you can download it from here. And it's also in Documents and Resources for Unit 8. And here's the sample and here's what we're going to open first. So what I'd like you to do first is open this up in Word. Now, when you do that, it opens right in Word. You can download it, and we're going to talk about this in Word, and I'll go over a couple things in here that we'll adjust kind of from the outside in terms of bigger issues that are affecting readability. But also, let me just go back here and show you the sample. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly like this, but I'll zoom out a little. This is a nice looking layout. I'll kind of go back so you can see the spacing on it. It's a nice looking layout, a lot of white space around it. There's a source that's down in the header footer area. You can see we adjusted the line length so that the line length isn't very long. It's a nice readable document in a nice serif font with a nice heading. We have subheadings that we put in a sans serif font. We have a little bit of line spacing that's increased ever so slightly. We have a wrapped photograph in here that was cropped. So some things here that we're going to make it look really nice and readable for just a print document, but then also we're going to work on this for the web, so we could use some CSS and work on the web as well. And we just used a little bit of color here. We used a little bit of this kind of rusty color that we pulled from this bottle, just kind of a dark orange color, and we're going to work with that. And we're going to work with what we have in Word, so we're going to try to use fonts that everybody has. We're not going to download anything or look for anything real specific. We'll try to find something that Word has. And I even looked up fonts that are on Windows that are also on Mac that come with the Office family. So if you have it installed, you should have a lot of these. And some nice serif fonts that we're going to look at are going to be like Callisto, Constantia, some other ones other than Times New Roman. So we're going to try to get away from Times New Roman. I'll keep this open right now just to take a look at it. Keep in mind this is in PDF format, so don't just try to use this and say, oh, there it is, it's done. So try to work through doing this in Word. Everybody could probably use this because everybody probably needs help designing nice stuff in Word. Before you're working in InDesign or any other design layout program, you should be able to do nice stuff in Word. So that's why we're doing this. So we're going to go back to Word and we're going to start with this. And first we're going to look at what's making this not very readable. Well, a couple things. We have long line lengths, meaning we don't have a lot of margin on the side, so it's more fatiguing to read across a page like this with line lengths that are going across. Also, a real obvious thing is it's all centered. That's why it's ragged on the left and ragged on the right. Those are terms that we'll use. We want it ragged on the right because that helps us find our place a little bit better. When everything's all the same, it's easier to get lost. But when you have this raggedness on the edge, it's easier to kind of get to your next line, but not when it's on both sides. So we're going to take that out of being centered. You never want to center a lot of body copy. So some rules here that are being broken. You don't want to have small margins. You don't want to have type that's in all italic or on an angle. This is basically oblique type that's a sans serif. So that's not a good readable type. Everything looks like lines and angles and stuff, so it's really hard to read. We want to make sure we have a nice margin. We want to make sure that we have a left justification on the side, so we always have a nice starting place to come over here to find, and we always have a little bit of variation on the edge. We don't ever want to make it completely straight on the end. Sometimes it looks nicer, but it doesn't help readability. So we're going to address that. We're going to take it out of being centered. So we'll start working on this right away and then build up to what we had for the sample. So what we'll do first, just by looking at this, now we're in Word. I have my invisibles on just to see where there's paragraph returns. You can see this is a heading paragraph. We have a subheading paragraph, and 3 paragraphs. And then there's just one down here that's our source that we could put maybe in the footer. I think that's what I did. So we'll deal with that. So if you don't have your rulers on, usually where you could do that is under View. You could check your rulers. I don't know if we really need them, but I usually keep my rulers on. You can kind of see where your margins are a little bit better. And speaking of margins, we're going to go to Layout, And let's just change our margins right off the bat to normal, which is 1 inch all around instead of ½ inch. So we'll shorten our line lengths. Shorter line lengths are easier to read. That's why in articles and newspapers and magazines, they'll be in 1 and 2 columns. They'll have short line lengths. You don't want to read things across a long page. Newspapers never had articles that go all the way across. They're always broken up into columns because it's just easier to read that way. So we don't want to have long line lengths. So already we did this. I'm going to highlight everything here. I'm going to put my cursor in here, and on Mac do Command A, and on Windows do Control A. And let's take it out of being centered. So I'm going to go back to my Home tab here and put it on left. I still want it ragged right over here because that helps us see differences in each line. We can identify which line we're on by the different line lengths there. But we want it nice and smooth over here. That just helps our eye move down the page. So we're addressing that. So we address the margin, we address the center alignment, which we wanted to take it out of, and then also we want to take it out of italic. It's in an Arial italic right now. And even just being in a sans serif font like Arial isn't a nice readable font for body copy. Now it's good for road signs and a lot of small copy on the back of packaging, and in any agreement, it'll always be in here because you could make it real small. But when you want to read, you're not going to read a novel or a textbook in a font like this in a sans serif. You might sometimes on the web see sans serif fonts a little more, but they're not even Arial. There'll be a little nicer sans serif fonts that have a little variation that you'll see on the web now. There's a lot nicer sans serif fonts that you can get from Google Fonts that are really nice. Not this. You don't want to read a printed document like this. So we're going to fix this and find a nice serif font. So I'm going to highlight everything first and put it in a nice serif font. Now it's already in 12 point. That's okay. That's a nice readable size. But I want to find a nice serif font. Now a couple nice serif fonts, and I even looked them up to see what was on Windows or Microsoft just to see so it's consistent with everybody. Now a couple are Callisto is a nice one. Now it's not typical, you might not have heard of Callisto, but it has a nice kind of group of 4. It has your regular italic, bold, bold italic. And why is that important? Because in Word you have the B button and the I button which will match up to those. Now in other design programs you may just have to choose all the different fonts that are there, you know, anything from light to heavy and all that. But for here, having the 4 group in Word isn't bad. It's not a bad way to work. So I'm going to go here and look at Callisto. There's Constantia, which is also on all the Microsoft systems from 8 on up, I believe. And that has a nice kind of old style feel to it. Baskerville is nice, but sometimes a little light in the italic. Garamond is nice, sometimes a little light and a little bit of too much of a slant. And a very extreme slant sometimes. It makes it harder to read. If I put everything in Garamond, it's really light. If I put everything in Constantia, you can see it's a lot heavier. And if I put everything in Callisto, actually, it won't look a whole lot different. It doesn't look a whole lot different. Callisto and Constantia are very similar. So I like Constantia. There's other ones. Baskerville. Georgia is nice. It's more of a transitional font. And it's not as much of an old style font, although we'll see things with these numbers where they go below the baseline that we'll talk about. Georgia is a nice font to use in PowerPoint. I use it a lot. It has a really nice bold. But for readability, it doesn't flow from letter to letter quite as nice as something like Constantia. So I'm going to put everything in Constantia. It has kind of a chiseled look. They call it a wedge type look. So it has a little bit more of a chiseled look when you get in there and you look at some of these letters. Look at the R, the way it's chiseled on the end. So it has a little more of an angled serif. The F and the R are kind of similar there. So if you're not sure what's making it distinctive, look at the R, look at the S's. They have kind of a chiseled wedge on the serifs, on the S's, has a really nice looking H. But serif fonts, they just flow into each other really nicely. And Constantia is a nice font. There's other ones that are nice, but this is a nice readable font. And it's not too light, so we don't want to go too light with it. So everything's 12 point right now, so it's going to be a lot more readable. So already, just by putting it in a font like that, that's going to help us a lot. Something else I'm going to do, I'm going to highlight everything again. I'm always going to be doing Control A or Command A. And I'm going to go to my line spacing. Remember, on a Mac, you have to go to this thing, where on Windows, you might have a little button there that'll open up your paragraph settings. So in here, they don't even call them paragraph settings. They call them line spacing options. But they're your paragraph settings because it says paragraph up here. And what I'll do is, instead of just 1.0, which is single spacing, I'll just put 1.1. Just give it a little air, a little bit of air. Look at that. Just a little bit of air will lighten things up a little bit, make readability a little easier. The last thing you want to do is have line spacing that's cramped together. So getting a little air in there Just makes it a little bit easier to read, especially since our line length is a little longer. I mean, we have inch margins, but we don't have 2 columns or anything like that. So that helps lighten things up a little bit. Just by increasing the line spacing. We don't want to make it 1.5 or double spacing like research papers, anything like that. That doesn't make it easier to read at all. But this helps out a little bit. What we'll do next is we'll kind of address our headings and then address our spacing. So I'm going to make this a heading. If everything's 12, I'm going to make this maybe double. So I'll go here and make it 24. And maybe I'll make it bold. It's our heading, and I can center it. You don't have to worry too much about it, but I'll center it for now. That's fine. And then we have subheadings down here. Enter Joseph Grohl, and then we have a beer like no other. They're the subheadings. I'm going to make those, instead of double, maybe I'll make them like 1.5. So 1.5 would be half of 12 is 6, would make them like 18. Let's see what 18 looks like. There's 18. Let's make it bold. Not bad. And then I'll do the same here. I'll go 18, and I'll make it bold. Now, that's fine, except we need a little space between these paragraphs. Now, you might say, do we need a first line indent? Do we need to go here and do a first line indent? Well, what do you think? Maybe, but typically what first line indents are for is when you have a lot of paragraphs and you need to always keep finding the next paragraph. Now, these paragraphs are kind of indicated by a headline and then a subheadline and a subheadline, and that's it. What does this do? What would that offer? Wouldn't offer anything. It's just taking up space, not really necessary. So in books and articles that have a lot of paragraphs, first line indents might help. But here, it's not really going to do us any help. So we're going to put this back. Let me click in here, and I'll move this first line indent back. And we're not going to use first line indents to help us with readability. We're going to use some spacing. So we're going to break up these paragraphs so there's some space between them. And what we're going to do here with this second paragraph is add space before. So we'll go here, we'll go up to our settings again, paragraph settings, line spacing options, and I'll go to space before, and I'll try 12 and see how that looks. Because it basically adds about a line in between, and that looks pretty good. And then I'll go here, I'll do the same thing. Now, we're not getting into styles or anything like that yet, so we're just doing things one at a time. If we had like multiple pages, we might start creating styles, but for now, we're just doing things one at a time. So I'll do the same thing here. I'll just repeat what I did and make it space before 12. And that looks pretty good. And even just for a little variation like I did on the sample, I took this and I put it in a sans serif font. And you might think, why are you introducing a sans serif font? Well, for contrast. And it'll set itself off even differently from this one. So I'm going to go here and choose just Calibri is a nice one. That's a nice sans serif font to use on Windows, other than Arial and things like that. So Calibri is always nice. It's a nice readable sans serif font. I'm going to use that, and that looks pretty good. It could probably even go smaller because it looks a little bit bigger as a sans serif font. It could probably even go down to like 16 point, but we'll just change it right now from Constancia to Calibri. And it's staying in the bold, and that looks nice. And our layout looks pretty good right now. We have space before here, we have space before here. It's getting nice and readable. What would help the readability? Well, shorten the line length even more. Do we have room to give a little more margin on either side? Well, let's try. Let's go here, and we're not going to mess with indents. Let's just go right to the margins. Layout, margins, and now that we have normal, we could go to custom. And I'm just going to put on the left and right 1.25 and then 1.25. Now we got to be careful because it could break things to another page, and we want to try to keep this to one page. Okay, so it is breaking here, but we'll fix that. So that looks better. The shorter line length you get, the better. So you want to keep nice short line lengths. And we don't have any hyphenation going on, so we don't want to have a lot of hyphenation. So that looks pretty good. And we could add a little color. It wouldn't hurt to add color. You could go here, go to your home tab, and I just picked out like a dark kind of brown color, dark orange, I guess I should say. So using a dark orange here. That looks good. I'll go here and use the same one. You just click here, click here. Works pretty much the same on Windows. And that looks nice. I could turn this off just to see what it looks like without all the non-printing characters showing. It's coming up with some names here that may be wrong. It doesn't know what lagering is. Lagering is basically just kind of like storing it. When you lager something, it just sits for months in the cold, kind of fermenting and becoming beer. And this thing, this source, we could put this in the footer. So I'm going to cut this out of here. I'm just going to do Command X, and on Windows do Control X. And I'll double click down here. If you're not sure where your header footer is, you could go Insert Header Footer. I'll just go to Footer down here, and I'll just put blank at the bottom. Or you could just double click down here, and I'm going to just paste that thing down here. And my footer looks a little high. But anyway, while I'm in here, I'm going to highlight this and go to my Home tab, and maybe I'll put that in Calibri. And maybe make it a little smaller, maybe like 10. Doesn't have to be real noticeable, just has to show us where this article came from. Let me go in here, and there's extra paragraph. I didn't even see them. I turned this off. There's extra paragraphs in here. I was wondering why it was going there. I'm going to get them off and backspace again. And then I probably don't need that space before. Sorry about that. That was my fault. I didn't see those extra paragraphs in there. So now I probably don't need that. That's the way it should look. That looks better now. So that's a ½ inch from the bottom. That's what I was wondering why that wasn't working, but apparently I had extra returns in there. So again, if you ever want to see your returns, make sure you turn on your Show Hide button. That looks good right now, and that space I think is just the normal spacing. I don't think I have any more space before. I took it away there, so it's okay. And that looks good down there. So last thing I'll do here is put in a photo. We'll put in a nice photo just like on the sample over here. Kind of wrapping text around it and put it to the right. I always like to put photos to the right and keep your eye kind of moving in that direction. You don't want to have text to the left. If you move this thing over, then it makes ragged text on the left side. We always want to keep text ragged on the right side here. That's what we're doing. So we'll go find some picture of Pilsner. So I'll just go to Google and Pilsner. It shouldn't be that hard to find Pilsner. Now you'll see cans and stuff. I'll just go to Images. And you don't have to use the same thing I use, but that's a Pilsner glass. But I'll see if I could find something else here. There's Pilsner. There's Pilsner. Crate and Barrel. I guess that's a Pilsner. That's the one I used. Here's a Pilsner. Oh, let me click on this and check it out. Oh, that's actually like a ping file here. That's fine. And what I'll do is I'll copy it. Right click, copy image. And I'll go back to Word. And I'll just go in this top paragraph and I'll paste it. And it's gigantic. And you may paste something that's gigantic. That's okay. I'm going to make it smaller by clicking on it and grabbing on the end. Start scaling it down. And then what I'll do is I'll wrap it. Now, how do you wrap it? Well, I'm going to double click on it. And it should bring up something called wrap text. You should see, or you can actually just right click and you might see wrap text. And I want to wrap text kind of on a square. So I'm going to use that. Now, I don't want it on the left side. I'm going to move it over here. And you can see text is wrapping around it. And I'll move it down a little bit. I don't want it right up at the top, although you could do that. But it's kind of now right up against the title. So I want to move it down a little bit, make it even smaller. Something like that. I don't want text over here. You don't want to do that. So you want to make sure you move this as far as you can over here, about where the margin is. So I'm kind of lining it up there. Move it down so you don't just have one line there. We'll have at least a couple lines there, and that looks okay. You could even make it smaller. You could even crop this more. You could double click on here. Well, we did double click. So when you double click, this stuff usually comes up, and I'll go to crop. And I'll use this little kind of handle here, and I'll crop it in just a little. And I'll crop it in just a little bit more. And click off of it. And I could even put a little border on here if I want. Now, that's over here. There's a little stroke thing over here. And I could go here and add a little black border on it. And go to weight. Maybe just put it up to 1 point. Something like that. That looks okay, except for it's so close to the top. I might move it down just a little bit. Now, actually, the other example, let me just point something out here. The other example I had, I put a border on here because there's kind of a background. But on this one, we might not need a border. Because I have kind of a white background, so I might just take the border off and put no outline, and that way it just kind of floats in here, and that might look better. I don't know why have a border in there. You might have a border if you have, a color and there's some white parts, but right now I'm going to leave it like that. Matter of fact, you could even, rotate it a little. Might look neat. Just give a little more movement. And that's not too bad. Now you don't want to do that. Now I'm squashing it. I don't want to do that. If I wanted to crop it anymore, I could go here and crop it in a little. That would bring the text a little closer if you needed to. And that's not too bad. That looks okay. You can even move it over just a little. So that's wrapping text around an image. That's called text wrap. And that's applied to the image, not to the text. So that looks okay. I'll move it down just a little. And that looks okay. And let's see what happened with our text. Did it bump to another page? We got about 2 lines and 2 words that bump to another page. So what can we do? Well, we could make things smaller. We can make our headlines smaller. These things, we could take them down to 16. Let's try that first. Let's make this 16. Let me make this one 16. And let's decrease our space before. We had 12. What if we did it like space before, not 6, but maybe like 8. Kind of split the difference. That still looks nice. And we'll go here and do the same thing. On Mac and the Windows version, I don't think it'll go down automatically. It goes down 6 points at a time. So I'll hit OK. Now did that bring everything in? We still have a line here. So what could we do? Well, we can make this smaller. We can make our Pilsner smaller. We can make our text smaller. It's 12 point. What if we highlighted all our text? Now, not our headlines. We'll leave our headline and subheadlines alone. But what if we went here and made them 11.5, 11.5? And to be consistent, we'd want to make these 11.5. Now, don't highlight through it because then it'll make that 11.5. So highlight here and make that 11.5. And then I'll make this 11.5. And that's just a slight difference. It'll still be very readable. Actually, that looks nicer now because now we have a little more space at the end. I'll close this up. And that looks pretty good. We could even spread it out a little if we want. We could basically do a Command A. Now this is for everything. The line spacing is everything. So we can go here to line spacing options. Now it was at 1.1. We could do 1.15, which a lot of times is a default in Word. Now that's only a very small amount. It's already at 1.1. We're just making it 1.15. So that should just be slight. Let's see if it pushes anything off the page. No, it kind of spreads it out just a little more, and it looks nice. So we have a nice looking layout here. I'll turn off this, and we do have things like brewmasters in there. Some of these things, spell check are coming up with them, but we'll look for anything else that spell check may be flagging as spelled wrong. But we have names, we have logering, that's about it. Saz is a type of hops, but that looks pretty good. So that's all we wanted to do here is just make a nice looking document. We're going to do this for web design too, and make some nice looking web pages with some nice web typography. But for print, which is what we're working on now, a nice serif font. Costantia is a nice serif font. 11.5 is a nice body copy. And we have a nice bold serif headline here. Then we use sans serif just to vary things just a little bit here with a sans serif font because they pop just a little bit more, a little bit heavier, and a little bit cleaner. And it's a nice looking document. We put our source in sans serif down at the bottom. Now it looks gray now. That's only because it's in the footer. If we ever have to double click in there, it's not really gray. And you could put a hyperlink in there if you want, but this isn't for the web. This is for print. So it's a nice looking document. So again, we're focusing on readability. We took something that you saw what it was originally, and this is what it looks like now. Now the first thing I should have had you do, which I didn't, is first of all save it. Save it and make sure you replace last F with your last name, first initial, and save this somewhere on your computer. If you save it in downloads, that's fine, because then just make sure you upload it. You could save it with your GR132 somewhere, but maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll go here, spring 2023, GR132 notes. I'll just put it in my notes for now, and it has my last name on that, so I know it's not a sample. I know it's not anything else. I'll save it there, and you can also save it as a PDF version if you want. But I'm going to keep it in a Word version right now, and this is what you're going to upload. So this is what it should look like. 11.5. We have 1 1/4 margins on either side, 1 inch on the top and bottom. I had a little issue there with my footer, but that's because I had extra returns in there. Once I took them out, they were fine. This is 10 point Calibri down here. So everything worked out pretty nice. This is, I think, 16 point Calibri bold, and our body copy ended up being like 1.15 line spacing. So a nice looking document. Let's just zoom out here. What did I do here? Oh, I deleted one of my headlines. I was trying to do Command minus. You have to use this thing, this little zoom down here. And now it looks pretty good. So it's a little bit different than our first one, but a nice readable document. That's all you want to be able to do in Word, is make nice readable documents. Nice serif typeface, nice graphic over there. Once we work on web pages, we'll do the same thing. And again, we took everything out of italic, because if you need something in italic, I don't know what would be, I'll just put this in italic. You know, italic is meant to stand out and look different from everything else. It's not meant to read everything in italic. So it's meant to bring something to your attention by being a little bit different. That's all you have to do for this. This is just kind of a readability. We're going to start doing stuff for the web as well, but we're trying to design nice things for print, even with Word. I mean, Word is a tool where you have lots of typographical tools here, and a lot of people don't know how to use them or use them correctly. So we're just trying to do that, and also just do nice design and use nice typography. That's what we did here. A nice serif font. We're not using Times like people always use. We're using something different, Constantia. We're using Calibri, which is a nice sans serif font, and we're making a nice readable document. And that's all we want to do. Make nice readable documents. You wouldn't believe how hard that is to do sometimes, or some unreadable documents that you'll see. So we're just helping readability here, and that's always a great thing, whether it's on a resume or a flyer or an article or anything that you do. So once you're done with this, you could save it. You could close it. It's always best to close it before you upload it. So I'm going to close it. And here's my sample. And I'm going to go back to coursework. And I'll go down to Unit 8. And I'll turn it in. Now to turn it in, you're just going to go on here again. And go down to Add Comment. And you're going to upload a file. Not a link, not an image. You're going to upload a file. So just go here. And go to Upload. And find your document. I think I put it in Spring 2023. If it's in downloads on your computer, wherever you have it, just find it. I'll go in here to Notes, and it's called 11 Readability. It's the one with my last name. There it is. And I'll hit Open, and then I'll hit Insert, and there it is. You don't even have to make it open in a new tab. This is fine like that. That's all you have to do. Just turn in your document, make sure it looks nice. And if you have any problems in Word or whatever, or accessing Word, whatever, let me know so I can either do something alternative or help you with it. So that's what you're going to turn in. You're going to click on that, and I'm going to look at it and go, wow, that looks really nice. Or I'm going to say, hey, wait, why did you use that font or this font or whatever? But also, another thing I'd like you to do, actually, in your comment, if you could just go down here, I'd just be curious, even if you just hit return and just put in, you did it on Microsoft, Windows for Word or whatever. You just put Word Windows, if that's how you did it. If you did it in something else, if you did it in Word Mac, if you did it on Microsoft 365, whatever. Just put what you did it in here. That would just help me. If there's any issues, or I was like, why did you use that font or choose that font? If you did it in Google Docs, for that matter, I could always do something in Google Docs. I can make it look just as nice in Google Docs. But I was trying to find something where everybody had the same fonts. If I would do it in Google Docs, I'd use Crimson Pro, because that's a nice Google font for that. But anyway, that's all you need to do for ex11 readability. And we're going to be doing some more kind of readability and more layout, and just working with typography, both for print and for the web, coming up.